welcome everyone. We're kicking off our career series for students actually around the country, not just here at Berkeley. And Wilson Sonsini is our lead off in this series and has helped us design that. Today we have a really interesting topic, one that's actually really close to my career path. I made these decisions. Actually, I got lucky. I guessed and I got right on my decisions through my career. Nobody advised me. Didn't always work out for my friends the same way. So I think this is a great discussion. So let me introduce you to Andrew Mokey from Wilson Sonsini. Andrew is from the Washington, D.C. office, so brings us not just a California perspective, but really a national perspective. And I mean, I'm sure everybody knows Wilson. The thing about Wilson that's important for this discussion is it has multiple offices. Everybody knows its origins are here in Silicon Valley, but then it's now really a national firm. So when you start looking and making decisions about offices to work in, what does it mean to work in the home office or a regional office? Some people refer to them as satellite offices, and maybe that's in itself its own indicator of how they view the firms or view those offices. But there are a lot of differences among firms. There are a lot of differences in offices and opportunities, more today than in the past. I think these are great opportunities for students, great opportunities for young attorneys, all the way through senior partners to be able to move to different offices. But how do you start? It's kind of an overwhelming choice. You're choosing firm, you're choosing practice area, you're choosing location. How do all those affect your career? And so now we have somebody that's seen a tremendous amount of these decisions. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you adding this to the knowledge base.
Well, thank you for having me. I think when it comes to considering offices at a multi-office firm, there are many things to consider. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm gonna presuppose that that you've already kind of come to a decision on the type of work you want to do. So you've thought about the practice area that's most interesting to you and that you think you want to pursue. And so now you're trying to decide, where do I want to do that? And that's kind of where we'll dive into. Wayne mentioned that at Wilson Sonsini, our headquarters is in Palo Alto. I'm in the DC office, and so some might consider that a satellite office. I would discourage you from thinking about that as an important factor. A lot of people think, well, headquarters is in this city, and the office that I'm interviewing with or looking at is in another city. And is that going to be a disadvantage for me in terms of a career perspective? And it's really not the case. I think there are many opportunities available, especially at large law firms in various offices. And so I think what you'll want to do is look at the practice areas and go where your interests lie, and not necessarily consider or worry about whether you're at the headquarters or whether you're at a regional office. Partnerships, they're designed to work across offices, and these offices exist to service different client bases. And so each office is important in its own right. And so the least of your concerns, I think, should be whether it is, the headquarters of the first office and whether it's, a regional office. So let me assure you that that you can kind of put that aside in terms of the calculus.
Well, and Andrew, I have to add to that. I built my entire career in a regional office of a major competitor to Wilson, and it came with a few differences in making connections, but great decision. I got to live where I wanted. I got to work with a client base that was local. Never impacted career path at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, if we want to talk a little bit about how to evaluate that and make these types of decisions, I think in terms of research that people do, the first step for most people is a firm's website, and I'll tell you, you have to dig deeper than that. Looking at law firms' websites, you'll be amazed to discover that every law firm has a collegial culture and embraces entrepreneurialism. It's an incredible coincidence that all law firms are populated with people who believe in that. Um, so you need to dig a little bit deeper, but realize that there's a reason that law firm websites look the way they do, and they're really they're servicing multiple audiences. So obviously for this audience, law school students, you're using it to learn about a firm, but there are also, a large intended audience of any firm's website is clients, and from the perspective of the partnership, that might be the most important audience for them. And so what you're seeing on a firm's website is not necessarily going to service you when it comes to doing your research and trying to figure out where, where a particular practice thrives, and what may look like a practice in an office is really is really a function of the website and not necessarily a function of reality. Um, so you can learn some things on a website, a firm's website, and I will say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, we realize this, and so we've put a lot of work into our own website and with a dedicated careers page that can help you dig a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about our firm. But you're going to have to dig deeper. I mean, it is a great place to start, particularly if you want to learn more about an individual attorney or someone you've met. It's a great way to see their bio and gather information on them. But remember that the website services a wide variety of audiences, and you as a law school student or a candidate are just one of them. One resource I would highly encourage you to delve into is the NALP directory. So the National Association for Law Placement. I'm not sure if students are familiar with this as much as we in the recruiting side and career services are. I mean, it might play an outsized role for us, but it really is a great resource. If you go to the NALP directory, look at the firm that you're interested in, and then kind of delve into the crosstabs. There's a real wealth of information that you can dig into and learn a lot more about the firm itself and then each individual office in a way that you're not going to be able to discern from a firm's website. You can learn things like the number of partners and associates in each office, really granular data about each practice, and again, the number of partners in that practice in a particular office. You can even see information about their projections for hiring for the following year. So you can see the size of a summer class from the previous year, the current summer class, and the projections for the next year's summer class. And so this is information that you can really use to your advantage once you realize, when you know what practice area that you're interested in. You can look at an office and see, wow, they had X number of summer associates there this year. This could be, very fertile grounds for me to pursue a position at. Whereas if the number of summer associates was 0 and the projections for the next year is also 0, that might not be the best place to submit your application.
One thing I would add there, I have students ask me from time to time, what does it mean when a partner has 2 or 3 offices listed? And my general advice to them is look at the phone number. That's probably where they spend most of their time. But I think that's a great point, that partners are sometimes showing, look, I do work in Silicon Valley, but I also do work in San Diego, but I'm only there every other week or something along those lines. And that's probably important for students to understand, that that may not be your day-to-day mentor if they're splitting offices.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very good illustration of the way that that presence in multiple offices is really, it's client facing. It's meant for, that partner's practice and their business development. They want to have that presence. But you're right. It doesn't mean that's where they're sitting day to day. Likely not. It's unless they can time travel, they're spending the majority of time in one office. And if you want to work with that person, that's the office you should target.
It's hard to tell from the websites unless you, like you said, dig deeper.
That's right. Yeah. And so when you're doing that research, and let's say you're getting to the interview phase and you're talking with somebody, that's your opportunity to kind of to suss that out. Ask them, um, who are the partners that they work with? How often are they working with partners in different offices? Where's the work coming from? How often do they travel to other offices? That's really going to help you gain insight into, where that practice focuses and where you want to be. Many firms will work across offices very seamlessly, and I think the pandemic has really kicked this into hyperdrive, and I guess one of the silver linings of the pandemic was that it really encouraged firms to embrace remote work and working across offices. The vast majority of what we're all doing is sending emails anyway, and you can do that from home. You can do it from New York, and you can do it from London. It's people work across offices very frequently. On the other hand, some offices or some firms don't function that way. And so when you're talking with somebody, you would want to ask them, how often do you work with partners in other offices? Where does your work come from? If it's exclusively one office, there's something that you can glean from that. If it's partners in multiple offices, that tells you something too.
I'd love to follow up on that question, which I don't think is asked enough. Probably the most telling: where does your work come from? And the most dangerous answer in my mind is 100% from somewhere else. That means no business has been being generated locally. You're probably more of a stop for labor than you are a real contributor to a practice group. So it's a wonderful thing to understand, but it's not a problem if half of the work comes from other offices. Actually, that shows that the firm is functioning well. So it's a great question to ask, and if people can't answer it, that's also telling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it is, like you said, it's healthy to be getting work from multiple sources. You never want to put all of your eggs in one basket, and you need to think about, your brand within your firm, and getting to know as many people as possible. So when it comes to consideration for partnership, if that's something that you aspire to, you're going to want to have multiple advocates in your corner. And so, working across offices or working at the very least with different partners is going to be crucial for you. And as you said, if all of the work for an individual is coming from a different office, you can probably glean something about, your long-term prospects for advancement and promotion in that office. It might not be great. That's not to say that there aren't reasons that situations like this exist. And and if you have ties to a certain area, if you need to be in a particular place, like I said earlier, with with modern technology, those opportunities exist. But you just need to be cognizant of how that might impact your chances for long-term success, mentorship, advancement, and those types of considerations.
Those are actually two different considerations: short-term mentorship, development for your first few years, and then long-term, if there are no clients in that area or no potential clients, then that becomes difficult to generate new business. You don't get to go to the events, the social events, the the charity events that normally kind of drive some of the business development in a local area. So if you're completely separated from the client, it's a long-term problem, but you still may get great mentorship for 4 or 5 years and prepare you for a great career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I alluded to this earlier, but offices, they spring up to service different clients. We've recently seen a boom in firms moving to Miami in Florida, and a lot of that is, following there's a tech boom down there, particularly driven by crypto. And so these offices spring up to service those clients. And so if that's what you want to do, you need to think about, is that where you want to be? And so look at that. Sometimes we see a large law firm and you just think that these offices exist because one got too big and so we need to open one in another city. That's not really how it works. There are business needs, and law firms open offices to service those clients. So again, when you decide what you want to do, and if you think about the type of clients that you want to work with, look at those geographic differences and focus your search there. If you want to work in technology, I suspect this audience might, the Bay Area is probably where you'll focus your search. Although different technology hubs are springing up all over the place. Salt Lake City, for example, and as I just said, Miami as well. So there's different geographic considerations that are going to go into your job search, and those, I think, will be driven by the client base and the type of work that happens in that region.
I spent much of my career in Boulder, Colorado, as it became the big tech hub. And it was interesting to watch that happen and that grow. And I think Wilson now has an office there since I left.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Colorado. This makes me think of another point that I think might be useful for your audience when it comes to considering different offices and where you want to do it. You need to be very thoughtful about how you make your case. And so I guess I should preface this by saying, if you're thinking to yourself, well, where should I apply? And maybe I want to be in Boulder, maybe I want to be in New York. It's perfectly fine to apply to multiple offices. Some people think that might be a negative, and you might get some advice, say, from career services that, oh, you should really, focus on a particular market. They're probably not going to tell you that. Now that I think about it, they're probably going to, tell you to kind of, take a broader approach to your job search. But when it comes to applying to offices in different cities, you need to realize that it's perfectly fine to want to be in different places. You just need to have a consistent and honest reason for applying to both. And what made me think of this is you mentioned Boulder. I probably would not say that, oh, I want to be in Boulder because I love to ski. Like that, firms are looking for stronger ties and better reasons than that. But if that's part of your thought process, it's perfectly fine to mention that. I mean, we're all people. You want to be a well-rounded person, but you need to think about what your tie is to that market, and explain that to the firm. Make your case about that office, and then you'll have different reasons for wanting to be in another office. It could be, well, I have family up in New York, and so I could definitely see myself living there. Or I really want to work at the intersection of government policy and the law. So DC might be the place for you. You can have different reasons for wanting to be in different offices. That's perfectly legitimate, and you should definitely feel comfortable in applying to different offices. But you really need to be honest and consistent when you're telling your story. Because remember, law firms, we have all this information in a central database. We can see it all. So if you write a cover letter that says, I only want to work in New York, and then another one that says, I can only see myself living in DC, that's clearly inconsistent, and it's gonna raise a red flag. The attorney interviewing you in New York might even have access to your DC cover letter as you're speaking. So you need to be honest with yourself, with the firm as you apply, and consistent. But you can do that and still be interested in different geographic regions. It's perfectly reasonable.
I think the best answer I got when I was interviewing people about Boulder, and it was a little bit shocking at the time. And then when you ask why Boulder, because people always want to, I mean, it's a great place. And the answer was never been there. Seems like a good place to live.
But
Uh, well, that's honest. No family, nothing else. So no ties at all. That was probably a wrong answer. But the sentiment wouldn't have been a wrong answer. Saying, look, I'm looking for a place that I can live long term. I can see myself being here. I'm an outdoors person. I don't want to be in New York. I can't stand tall buildings. This is the kind of place. You've got the right kind of clients. This seems like the right place for me. And
right.
that's a powerful pitch then, because all of us chose to live there because we liked it there. And just the same sentiment, the same truth, just packaged a little bit more palatably and a little more professionally, and why this would be a good long-term career. Because no firm wants to hire somebody for 6 months, and no, it's not good for firm or for an associate to have a short-term job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this audience, I imagine, is fairly young, and certainly compared to our graybeards here, we we're in a different place in our lives. But it's if you don't have ties to a geographic region, but you want to work there, that can be your story. You could say, hey, I'm young. I've got no attachments, no commitments. I'm really excited about what you do here, and I want to be a part of it. That's going to resonate with the firm. But as you said, the fear of the firm, the reason that they want to see some type of attachments or commitment or some long-term prospects is that the worst case scenario for a law firm is they bring you on, they spend 3 years training you, mentoring you, getting you up to speed, and then have you decide, you know what, I think I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna move back home. That's a nightmare for these partners. And so that's what's going on in the back of their mind as they're interviewing you, is there an ROI to the work that I'm going to put into this person, training them up, teaching them, or are they going to drain that knowledge and commitment that I put into them, and then move back to wherever home is. That's their fear. And so through your conversations with them and through the application process, you need to assuage that fear in them. And you also, again, you need to be honest with yourself. Is that your motivation? And you need to be, in life, you should always kind of write your plans in pencil. You need to be willing to, maybe if you do have no connection with Boulder, but you're excited about that work, you need to be ready to kind of to make that the center of your life, and maybe that'll be the case. But on the other hand, again, if life happens and life is funny, and we all get pulled in different directions. And so you're not making you're not signing up for a life in one particular office. It's perfectly reasonable for life to take you in other places. But again, in the back of the mind of the people in that office hiring you is the investment that we make in this person, is it going to pay off in the long term, or are we going to put time and effort into this person only to have them pick up and leave on us when they realize that in London it's kind of gray for 8 months out of the year. So you need to know what you're getting into when you do it.
That's the exact when I wound up in Boulder, I was moving as the second year from Dallas and got a headhunter call, went and interviewed as so basically a young associate. And I'd never been to Boulder. Um, but I grew up kind of in the region. But that was my approach. Once I got there, I'd done the research. I'm like, this is actually something I want to be part of, not just here, but they're opening a new office, a new practice group, this booming tech market. And that was the pitch that I put out because at that point, I wanted the job and I wanted the job there.
Mhm.
And so the prep let me be a whole lot more passionate about doing that and applying there than if I would have just kind of driven in and said, wow, this is a pretty place. Um, I could see myself here. Well, I had a whole lot more to pitch and then, it changed my life. I spent 17 years there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and it's certainly a great reason to take the interview, but also, as you said, um, there are there are reasons to be in an office other than the headquarters. If you've got, you know, in Chicago, the office is 800 attorneys and it's been there for 80 years. And you go to work there, you might just be small fish in a big pond. If you go to a smaller office that a firm is dedicated to and committed to building, it really is a tremendous opportunity to grow and to shine. And with the resources that large law firms have, being in a small office can really, be an opportunity. It's very similar to kind of, you can equate it to, being at a startup. I think this will, kind of resonate with our Silicon Valley members of the audience, that you're going to be in a very, small atmosphere, a lot of opportunities, working very closely with partners and the clients, but having the resources of the enormous platform of these law firms. So, harkening back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're trying to decide, ooh, well, do I want to be at the headquarters versus this office seems a little bit smaller, that could actually be a great opportunity for you.
I used to tell people that the great thing about working in the smaller offices is there's no place to hide. And that means you're going to get mentoring. And if you can do the work, I think you accelerate faster than your peers do in the big offices where, there are lots of people to choose from. If there are only two patent litigation associates, the two of you are going to be getting all the opportunities. And the downside of that is there's no place to hide. If you're not showing up for work every other day, it's going to show up pretty quickly. But I'm a huge believer that a lot of the opportunities come out of the other offices, and of course, opportunities come out of the home office too. But it was a little bit more entrepreneurial spirit. The smaller offices give you some chances, but you have to embrace those chances. There's a little bit more aggressiveness that's required to make sure you're good at what you do, you're on top of things. But just by sheer necessity, I remember my work assignments were well above my competency level.
Right. Yeah.
And I had to get there quickly because there was no seventh year to give work to. I had to do everything from first year work to seventh year work. And I had a mentor that had no choice but to mentor me because there was no one else to give the work to. So if I didn't do it, he did it. And
Right.
that was the last thing he wanted to do. So I got training. And I think that's a great thing to look at and a great thing to think about when you're interviewing for any office. What's that training model look like? So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you have to sink or swim, but yeah, it does. It provides enormous opportunities for you that might not exist in other offices that are bigger and have that kind of more hierarchical infrastructure. This is a bit of a tangent, but what you just said made me think of it in terms of like, um, if you're there, people see you, and you get those opportunities. And I know this is kind of an unpopular topic these days, but I do think it's important for people to be visible and be in the office if you can. I mean, there's obviously we all have different circumstances, but really showing up and being there is going to be the best way for you to get those opportunities. You need to be visible, and there are ways of being visible remotely, but especially when you're young, when you're starting your career, when you're looking for opportunities, being there is important. Um, that said, I'm not advocating for a 5 day a week in the office environment. I don't think things are ever going to go back that way. And the unfortunate reality is that partners have always had that opportunity or that luxury of working from home or working remotely or working from their cabin in Maine all summer. Um, it's the more rank and file folks who had to be in the office every day, and we've had a kind of a leveling effect that now now we all have a certain amount of flexibility, which I certainly don't want to part with, and I don't think anyone else should either. But when it comes to seeking opportunities, being there and being present it's so crucial, especially early in your career. But that's a tangent.
No, it applies from in the the regional offices. It applies everywhere. You got to be really proactive. Don't sit back, wait for things to come to you. Relationships, different things, you have to develop them. And you said there are techniques to do it virtually. If you're in a litigation department, half the team may be traveling. So, I'd go weeks without seeing the partner I worked for because, person was going one direction for depositions, I was going another. And you have to think about ways to actively keep up with mentors and as a partner with mentees.
Mm-hmm.
People on both sides have to be engaged. So it works. I think what I've seen works perfectly despite the size or regardless of the size of the office and regardless of office location. It's all just about people engaging there.
Great.
Technology is fantastic. It's not like the old days when you needed a physical file to move around.
Right. And it's not going away, and it's only going to get more. Our reliance on technology is obviously only growing and changing the industry.
It's actually a good point to bring up that sometimes these myths about regional versus home offices are rooted in the past. They're rooted before we had online file sharing systems that really you kept a litigation file and it was almost impossible to get information out of that file if you weren't able to physically access it. So the access to documents first kind of opened things up, and now the access to people through Zoom makes it even easier. I mean, those of a certain vintage, and you don't have to be very old, remember the difficulty of planning conference calls. The old WebEx days where you had a special number, and my firm had a WebEx specialist that you would call and they would set up the conference call for you. Well, that just meant nobody used it.
Right.
So the technology has enabled a lot more, but some of the myths about regional versus home offices really hasn't caught up because there are still people that were raised in that environment.
Right. Yeah, times have changed. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and it's just this conventional wisdom is slow to evolve, and I think that's where this kind of myth comes from. Well, what else can I tell you? What other questions do you have?
Well, no, those are all wonderful discussions. I mean, I think the thing that I take away from this is that students really just need to be prepared to answer that question. Apply where you want to apply. Just have a reason for it, an explanation, and do the research on it. Why do you want to be there? And if you're gonna, like, I love the point, apply to 2 offices or 3 offices. Just be clear. Look, I'm looking for a place to be long term. I could be here or I could be here. I've got spouse's family here, spouse's family there. I grew up half in New York and half in Miami. Both places are like home for me. Whatever the story is, it just needs to be consistent and own it, be proud of it.
Exactly. And as you said, do the research, dig in. And again, I'll point people to the NALP directory of law firms. Get in there and look at it, dig into those crosstabs and see if you want to do space law. Go in there and see, is there a partner in this office that even does that? If not, if you walk into an interview and say, I love space law, I know you all do space law, they might be thinking to themselves, do we? I didn't realize that. So you want to arm yourselves with the information. And again, if you're looking at the firm's website, you might be the impression that they do that there. But as you said, if a partner has multiple offices under on their business card, that doesn't necessarily mean that that practice is an important component of a particular office. And you need to arm yourselves with the knowledge going into this interview and going into your job search of, do they really do that here? And if not, you probably shouldn't focus on that.
Well, and the other place for research, I know we here at Berkeley do a lot of this, but programs for students throughout the year. You bring in lawyers, career fairs, individual lunch talks, job talks. Go to those, listen to what you hear from one firm to the next, ask questions, follow up. Most people are happy to answer questions because I can tell you all the lawyers have been through this and have, most of us have changed firms at one time or the other, and we've seen people make bad decisions and be unhappy. We've seen people make good decisions. So I think most people are willing to share real information, not just recruiting information, not just come work for us regardless, but help people find a happy place for them. Within the variations, location, practice areas. So do the NALP research, do this live research, ask people questions, compare and contrast. I usually say when you start getting the same answers from multiple people, you're getting close to the truth.
Right. That's a data point.
Because usually we know the lawyers don't coordinate well enough on recruiting to tell the same story. Everybody tells their own story. So if everybody's beginning to tell the same story, it starts to line up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you
Well,
have to. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you have to get out there and you have to do the work. And the work is meeting people and doing the research. And I would just really encourage people, the sooner you start doing that, the better. Obviously, step one is figuring out what you think you want to do. I'll concede that that could change or that could evolve, but get a good sense of what you want to do and then figure out where you can do that. And the best way to do it is by meeting folks, going to these events. We hosted an event in our office last night. And I hope that the attendees who left came away with a better understanding of the Washington, D.C. office and our particular practices and our people. Law firms don't have a tangible product. We don't make widgets. A law firm is just a collection of people, and the product is their good judgment. And so the only way that you can tell the difference between law firms in the end is by getting out there and meeting folks and attending these events and really digging in and doing your research. And the sooner you start doing that, the better for you.
Well, I really, really appreciate the advice here. This is great. And again, the point here is to share this with students across the country to help people make good decisions, maybe steer people away from bad decisions, and help people find a healthy, happy career, because they do exist out there. I know that definitely. Like I said, 17 years in Boulder, spouse, kids. I would have never expected that when I was in law school, but great period of my life. So I had good guidance to get there. So I appreciate you helping others.
Yeah, oh, it's my pleasure. And I wish everybody the best of luck in this job search. I want to, ensure everybody that, there is a place for you. You will find your home, and so don't get discouraged. Just keep getting out there, put yourself out there, and you're going to find the place that's right for you. And to make a shameless plug, if you're interested in the technology and life sciences and want to work at a firm that's on the cutting edge of premier technologies and the law, consider Wilson Sonsini.
Well, and the thing is, you now have offices around the country for people to take a look at. So
And the world,
geography
yeah,
is not much of a limitation. So,
exactly.
well, again, thank you so much, and we look forward to talking with you more.
I mean, it's my pleasure. Thanks.